I hear this all the time, and I'm sure I will get some questions at the end of my presentation about the underwriting standards. We know that there's still foreclosure coming onto the market, shadow inventory, distressed properties. But these are the legacy of past lending mistakes during the bubble years. So again, we lended out too much to anyone, and we are still suffering the consequences of that. So when you see a foreclosure situation, those are loans that was made 3, 4, 5 years ago. The one sees what is the loan performance of people who recently bought their home. And so we look at the 2009 vintage. So we're looking at after 18 months, after the loan has been seasoned for 18 months. How does it compare to the past? And today it is at the historically low default rate, which means that people who are buying home or who bought a home in 2009, who bought a home in 2010, they are successful homeowners. There's very, very little default, historically low default. They are successful homeowners. They enter the market at the low point. They are not underwater because prices have essentially stabilized. So their loans are performing very, very well. That's good news. The bad news is that why is it performing so well? Well, the other part is the credit score requirement has greatly risen. Fannie and Freddie backed mortgages, historically, credit score was about 720, average 720. Today it is 760, average. So what does that mean? A typical middle-class, hard-working individuals who don't have a pristine credit, but ran into a trouble in the way past, so that credit score happens to be 700, they want to obtain a loan, and it is very, very difficult. From the loan originator point of view, it was mentioned on one of the sponsors of the local bank. I'm not sure how much of their origination is sold off to the Fannie and Freddie or FHA, and how much is held as a whole loan. But those that are, the banks are only willing to originate, that is, most banks are only willing to originate loans if they can sell it to Fannie and Freddie. If they cannot sell it, then they will not originate the loans. So we have been having meetings with Fannie and Freddie. Our NAR president, Ron Phipps, is very active in trying to have meetings with so many government officials all across. I think he will be having a meeting with the Treasury officials this week or next week. He has had various meetings with the Fannie and Freddie, the regulators of Fannie and Freddie, the HUD officials, showing this data to say, why is it too tight? Because yes, lenders made mistakes in the past, but it seems like because of the financial losses, they want to cover some of their financial losses from current borrowers. In other words, from current borrowers, they are not charging actuarially fair mortgage rates, but they are charging a little higher in order to get additional profit to cover some of the losses from past lending mistakes. And hence, these current good borrowers of today are being penalized, either in terms of slightly higher interest rate. I mean, it's historically low, but maybe it could be even lower. And also from some people who have been denied mortgages from coming in. So we have said that one has to consider the balance. We don't want to lax underwriting standards, but perhaps the pendulum has swung too much the other way, and we just want to bring it back to the normal. So again, the American dream of home ownership, where people work hard, middle class, they don't have a pristine credit, but good credit, they should be able to obtain mortgages, but they're having a very difficult time. Mortgage default, the broad number still remains high. Colorado doing better than the rest of the country, but still 5% default rate is high. But again, this is from past lending mistakes. It's not the current borrowers who are taking out loans 2009, 2010. Vacancy rate still appears to be high nationwide. There's less information locally, so I cannot comment, but vacancy rates still remain high, which is implying that we still need to, there's excess inventory that still need to be burned off, and it will take some time. Which also indicate that even with home sales rising, hopefully with job creation, that we may not get any strength in home values because there's this excess inventory that still needs to be burned off. One area of inventory that is far less discussed in the media is the inventory of newly constructed homes. It is at 40-year lows, but no one mentions that. It is at 40-year lows. And it is at 40-year low because builders are not building. This is the housing stock. Housing builders are not building, therefore there's fewer inventory available in the marketplace. But that low inventory of newly constructed homes is, in a sense, help mitigate some of the existing inventory that is out in the marketplace. But also, this low level of housing stock also is implying that some of the potential economic growth that could occur from home building, hiring construction workers, and then secondary spending is not occurring. And furthermore, builders, 2 years ago, they did not want to build because they built, they lost money. Why? They have to compete with foreclosed property, they have to reduce price, their profit margin disappeared, they lost money. But last year, some of the builders said, you know, our homes, our newly constructed home, is really not a substitute with that foreclosed property. I think we have a niche in the market. We want to build. So some builders were actually looking to build more last year. But when they went to the banks said, sorry, it doesn't have government backing on those construction loans, I cannot lend it to you. So even the builders who want to build, they are being held back right now, which implies that if this was to persist for another year or even 2 years, then we could be really looking at, possibly be looking at housing shortage in 3 years' time, if this was to persist. Because you have the natural job growth, and from the job growth, what you have is some loosening up in the household. Loosening up in the household. What do I mean by loosening up in the household? Right now, people are doubled up. There's a second roommate, third roommate. Many of the young adults are living with parents. But when the job market improves, then you see the case where the second roommate says to the third, "Going away," and one can only be together for just so long. Familiarity eventually breeds contempt. But job creation, I think, will be the area where it begins to loosen up some of the household, and that will be housing demand, either for rental or for buying. So if this low housing start was to persist, and then you have some of the loosening in the household formation, then we could easily, and I think this is a reasonable expectation, that we could encounter a housing shortage in 3-4 years' time. Again, if the housing start does not pick up. But I think housing start will steadily pick up, and I think that the banks, they are also sitting on cash. I think it's just inevitable the banking industry will go into the business for which they were created, which is lending. They're sitting on a pile of cash, so they will be looking for lending opportunities, so I think they will be steadily loosening in the lending area where it doesn't have government backing. Right now, only lending is on the areas where there is government backing, even though the underwriting standard is very restrictive. Colorado housing start, this is the data, so one sees that there was a bit of boom during the bubble years, and then past 3 years, very, very low activity on newly constructed homes. Return to normalcy. Each of these points I will go into in the subsequent chart. So this is the home sales in relation to how many jobs there is. So if there is 100 jobs, or say you are in a neighborhood with 100 people, 4 people would move in a given year. 4 people would move. During the bubble years, it was high, but now it's trended back down. So you are in a neighborhood with 100 people, 4 people would move. Now it's back to normal. Home price to income ratio. All the bubble price have been removed. And be fortunate you are in Colorado Springs, not Las Vegas, where prices shot up to 300,000 and now down to 100,000. And so people who bought right at the peak, and people who can make those mortgage payments, they're still wondering, why am I making mortgage payment on this $100,000 asset when I have $300,000 loan? So there is always this question about strategic default. Also for people in Las Vegas who bought their home 20 years ago, not at the peak, 20 years ago at $70,000. Today home prices are about $100,000. Well, surely they're not underwater. I mean, over that time, they must have paid down their mortgage. Well, unfortunately, during the housing market boom, when the prices were $300,000, they decided to repurchase their home at the peak price. In other words, cash out refi. And now they're in a situation. But for people who are buying today, they're buying at the low point. It may not be the absolute low. No one can call the low point of the stock prices, gold prices, oil prices, same thing for home prices. but one can comfortably say that it's near bottom, and essentially you are buying, people always want to buy at the bottom rather than at the peak, and it's clearly indicating that the bubble has been removed. Home price to income ratio is back down to normal. Home price in relation to the construction costs. Existing home is cheaper than to build that same home exactly with a new bricks, new pipes, everything. So it's again implying that there's a great bargain out there for people who are buying homes today. Rent situation are also beginning to tick a little higher. Washington, D.C. is a strange market because it defies economic gravity. I go across the country, Colorado Springs, I go to Las Vegas, I go to many other parts of the country, and everywhere I see recession. Commercial building strips where you see the vacancies, and it's a difficult time. It is a very, very harsh recession. Not in Washington. One goes around walking the sidewalk, job gains, job gains, job gains, people are smiling, all the restaurants are full. And you know, it's part of the stimulus package that eventually filter into the Washington market. I want to mention about this just to say, well, you know, people can have cynical view of how Washington is operating. Maybe they are away from the reality. But I mentioned the Washington market because I happen to be from Washington. The office is in Washington, and I had a couple of colleagues of mine who recently bought home. And I said, why did you buy now? Why did you buy 7 months ago when you could have gotten that $8,000 tax credit? And they said, you know, I never thought about buying a home. I thought I was not ready, or you know, I'm not really settled personally. You know, I'm not married, or things like that. So they were never considering buying a home. Then why the heck did you buy a home? And they said, well, my apartment complex, they're raising rent by 20%. And as a result, it tipped them over. So rising rents nationally is not that 20% of Washington, D.C., but this rent is beginning to show that it's beginning to turn around. And this will begin to force some renters to think about what is the better value proposition. So you have a job creation, also some rent growth, which means that there will be some apartment renters beginning to possibly consider buying a home. I take survey of realtors, and for some of you who do receive email to say, please complete the survey, I can usually take about 2 minutes to complete the survey, you know, click, 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 and to complete it. I thank you very much. I like to get some feel for what the realtors are experiencing out there. So I asked a question about short sales frustration. But another question that I asked about is about the price expectation. What do you think will happen to the prices in your neighborhood based on what you know about the foot traffic, based on your local job market, based on the inventory of homes that is out there? What do you think will happen to the home values? Interestingly, in 2009, 2010, more realtors say prices will rise, while fewer realtors said their prices will decline. At that time, nearly all economists said prices will fall 10%, 15%. What happened? Prices actually stabilized, or in fact, one looks at either NAR data can show that it actually increased somewhat in 2009, 2010. So what realtors were saying actually came to be reality compared to what economists were doing in the Wall Street with the advanced computer models. What are the realtors saying today after the tax credit? Right now it's evenly divided, 50-50. 50% saying prices will rise, 50% saying prices will decline, based on what they see in their neighborhood. So based on this, I will go with this forecast to say there will be no meaningful changes in home values over the next year and probably over the next 2 years.